Stuart.
Oh, hey. Hey, Lloyd.
When you started out, how did you break into this very difficult, what we call the movie business?
Well, I started with a script, which was a project that became the film Re-Animator. It was based on a story by H.P. Lovecraft, which I discovered was public domain. As a matter of fact, all of Lovecraft's work is. And that always helps because it means you don't have to pay for the rights. And was working on the script and started looking around for companies to produce it. And a mutual friend introduced me to Brian Usna, who had been raising money to make a movie that unfortunately didn't happen. And so he had money and no movie, and I had a movie and no money, and it was a match made in heaven. And the budget of Re-Animator was $800,000.
And this was what year?
This was in 1984. Now would be considered a pretty large budget. You can do movies for far less than that now. You have much more control over the smaller movies. The more money that's involved, the less control you have. And with a small budget, they pretty much leave you alone. The negative side of that is that there is no big studio that you can go to get more money. And so you have to be able to make it and finish it for that budget and stay on schedule.
Is horror something you love, or is it something that is commercial? Why horror, or if you call it horror?
Well, I do love horror, but I was told by my friend that horror is the easiest genre to raise money for. That a horror movie will never lose money if it's produced inexpensively, no matter how badly it may come out. And so that was his advice, and that's why we chose to go in that direction. The little horror movies that are the scariest. You look at movies like, Night of the Living Dead, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and these movies were made for, tiny, tiny budgets. But what really set them apart was that they were willing to go much further than a major studio would. They were ready to break rules. And we did the same thing with the Re-Animator. We decided that if we were going to make a movie that would be memorable, we really had to completely be as tasteless as possible and as extreme as possible, and not worry about the censors or getting an R rating or all of the things that big studios have to deal with. It was the scene in which Barbara Crampton, the heroine, is sexually violated by a headless corpse that became the scene that everyone talked about. And that was deliberate on our parts. We wanted to find something that we knew would completely shock and blow everybody's minds.
And you did.
The script is really everything, and that's something that doesn't cost anything to do. You sit down with paper and pen or computer, and you really hammer out a strong concept. And I think the thing that's most important when you do that is to just let yourself go and don't try to recreate something else that has been successful. Do something that you really want to see. The more money that's being spent on a movie, the less control you have over it. There's all these people that are, the bean counters that are there to make sure that everything is done, right, and they're always questioning everything that you're doing. So you, in a sense, are directing by committee on big budget movies. On small budget movies, they'll leave you alone, and it's a much more personal vision that you can express. But King of the Ants was made for about $350,000. And it was shot on 35 millimeter, which I thought was pretty amazing. But I've produced a film called Deathbed that was made for about $50,000 that was shot on digital video, which I had shot in about 9 days, which came out pretty well, and we were able to sell that worldwide.
How about editing?
Well, we used, with King of the Ants, we edited it on a PC, and we also did all of the sound mix on one. And we were able to use all of convert it back to film, which we ended up with a film that was able to be projected on 35 millimeter. The film was shot on 35 millimeter using short ends, which is frustrating because sometimes it means you've only got a couple of minutes worth of film. But when it was all done, we had a real movie. And the technology that's available today means that you can literally make a movie at home. And so in a sense, it's leveled the playing field.
How about the matchback to 35 millimeter? How do you do that without paying for it?
Well, that you do have to pay for if you're going to finally end up with a print, which is something that we felt was important, because if you show a movie on video, people think of it as a video, and we wanted them to really think of it as a film. And so we had to spend an additional, I think it was $35,000 to do all of the final film, you know, cutting negative and so forth, and getting the sound, you know, striped onto the film itself. But that was, you know, built into the budget, into the $350,000.
Now you work with stars. Is that something you feel that's important financially, or has it just happened? Like you've got stars in King of the Ants for $350,000, 35 millimeter, and stars.
Well, we were able to do that because they liked the script, and you know, the thing about you know, actors is that most of the work that they do is for stuff that is fairly, you know, formulaic junk. And if you've got something that's really exciting and new and gives them something to do that they think is interesting, then they're going to be there for you. But I also should say that with horror films, you really don't need stars. When you look at movies like, you know, 28 Days Later, which did extremely well, and there's no one in that movie that anyone in America knows. So it's really not necessary to have stars if the concept is strong and if the movie is really scary as hell.
How do you support yourself as an independent filmmaker?
Well, you know, I do support myself with my projects, and you know, you get a fee, and you usually try to cut yourself in for a piece of it. On King of the Ants, I own about 20% of the film, and so I'm going to be collecting the you know, that portion of the sales. So,
have you had trouble over the years getting your portion? I mean, you always read these horror stories in Wall Street Journal about Batman hasn't broken even yet.
No, that's true, and sometimes it is difficult, but what you have to do is you have to really pin down when you make the contract what the amount of money is that they're going to make back, you know, before they pay you. You know, with King of the Ants, we figured out that it would be $400,000, and after they had anything that they made over that, they would have to split with us. So it was very specific.
What do you think the hardest thing is now for a young person breaking in?
Well, I think that the hardest thing always is you have to keep at it. You can't give up. You know, it takes a while. You know, it takes a long time to get movies made. You know, when Clint Eastwood was making The Unforgiven, it took him 8 years to get the studio to finance it, and that's Clint Eastwood. You know, King of the Ants took 7 years to get made, and the movie I made before that, Dagon, actually took about 15 years before we could find a studio that was ready to finance it.
So you always have a number of projects.
Yeah, it's like fishing. You have to have a lot of lines in the water, so having as many different things as possible. But you also just have to keep on going and keep looking and not give up. I mean, I think that's the most important thing.